So there's another example of solving problems where I see them that also occurred in Mosul, Iraq. And you can see the photo of this event on our website where I'm in all my battle gear and I'm crouched down sitting next to a young Iraqi kid who is holding a pair of shoes even though he himself is barefoot. And the genesis of that photo actually started months before. We had just taken over our assignment in Baghdad. We had relieved the unit previous to us. So now our unit was in command and in control of that area, and it was our responsibility. So I happened to be late night one night, just walking along the fence line, going by the guard towers, just to check on our soldiers, see how they're doing. It was the middle of the night, quite cold when we got there in December, as I recall. And in the process, I just asked the guy, how are things? And he says, it's boring, but yet tragic. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, it's boring because not a lot's happening. But the tragic part is that as I look out, as he described, as he looked out over the fence, we keep about a 200-yard area of what we call the no man's land. We don't want people outside the base getting close enough to where we are because we want to keep standoff range. And to make that standoff range, initially we went out and we cut down the trees that were in the area nearby so we had a clear line of sight. But that was early on in the war. Well, years later when we got there in 2006, what had happened was Mosul and the citizens there that were living in a war zone had used every last bit of firewood they could find to heat their homes, to cook and boil their water, to make food, and to run their companies when needed, and to provide light or heat. And the tragic part of it was that the only wood or kindling left was in that 200 yards of no man's land. But parents, the adults, the Iraqi adults, could not go into that no man's land because if they did, it would be an obvious affront to our soldiers who were there trying to keep security and trying to keep standoff range. So the parents realized that these young soldiers in the guard towers were compassionate, real-life humans who would understand that if a kid walked out to gather firewood, we wouldn't shoot at them and we wouldn't be as hostile. And so can you imagine as a parent, in fact, you don't even have to have kids, to know the kind of humiliation it must have meant for those Iraqi parents, those breadwinners, those moms and dads, to know that they could so little provide for their family to cook water or to boil water, to cook food or to heat their home, that they would have to send their children into a combat zone of a no man's land to gather firewood. And the reason why it impacted me so much is when I went there, I too, at that time, had a 6-year-old, much like what the soldier went on to describe. My daughters at the time were 6 and 8 and 9 years old. But the thing that broke my heart was to know that those parents knew that the only way to sustain or to care for their families was to put their children in that no man's land. So right then and there, I said, we have to fix this problem. And if they're cold, if I can't provide the fuel or the heating to them, we can at least provide them hats, coats, and gloves. So I immediately went back to my computer, got on the computer system we had, started firing off emails to every family, friend, person that I knew. I said, ask your school, ask your church, ask your tennis club, ask anybody you can, ask your neighbors. Take every last hat, coat, and glove you're not using, put it in a box. And I gave them the address to send it. And after about 2 weeks, the first box arrived. And then the second, and then the third. And then by the time it was over, we had so many boxes in the storage room of our headquarters that it became a standing order of every patrol that would go out the wire that they would take a box per vehicle. And as they would go through the streets of Iraq, as they would leave out of our base, they would toss the hats and coats and gloves. And when able, stop the vehicles and get out and talk. And so that's where that photo comes from, of me seeing what our soldiers described to me as a problem right in front of us, of realizing that in a combat zone, there's no way to control for all the factors, but when you see a problem that you think you can fix, go and fix it. And be a part of that for that brief time brought a lot of good to the unit, and hopefully in some ways it brought a lot of good to Iraq as we were there, to recognize that we were there to try to help them. And there's no better expression of that than to help them keep warm in winter and make it so that hopefully fewer parents had to send their kids out into no man's land.